The Wild West, a time when justice was swift, brutal, and delivered at the end of a rope or the tip of a branding iron. As settlers pushed into untamed territories, they created punishments so savage they would haunt the frontier for generations. These weren't just methods of justice. They were warnings carved into flesh, burned into skin, and beaten into memory. Today, we're uncovering the 7 most brutal punishments ever inflicted on the American frontier. Punishments so horrific, they defined an entire era. This is the dark side of the Wild West that history tried to forget. Hanging. Hanging was theater in the Wild West. When word spread that an execution was scheduled, entire towns would shut down. Families traveled for hours, packed picnics, and gathered to watch a man die. The condemned would be paraded through streets in a wagon, sometimes forced to sit on their own coffin. This wasn't about justice. This was about sending a message that echoed through every dark corner where men might consider stepping outside the law. The actual hanging was far from quick or clean. There were no careful calculations, no consideration for mercy. Most victims stood on a horse or wagon with a noose around their neck. When the support was removed, they would hang there, slowly strangling for 5 to 25 agonizing minutes. Their face would turn purple, then blue. Their body would convulse violently as the crowd watched every second. If the rope was too short, strangulation. Too long, decapitation, with the head sometimes separating entirely, sending the crowd into chaos. What made frontier hanging particularly brutal was who was doing it and why. Vigilante committees operated in virtually every frontier town, and they didn't bother with trials. A man could be suspected of horse theft in the evening and hanged from a tree by dawn. The San Francisco Vigilance Committee hanged multiple men without official trials. Hundreds of smaller groups did the same. Sometimes they hanged the wrong man. The community would simply shrug and move on. The psychological torture was devastating. Condemned prisoners waited days or weeks, listening to hammers building their gallows outside the window. Some were forced to watch their hangman's noose being tested. The night before execution, many received visits from preachers trying to extract confessions. When the sun rose on execution day, the condemned knew with absolute certainty they would not live to see it set. That countdown to oblivion was its own torture. After the body was cut down, it was buried in an unmarked grave, often at the base of the gallows. Families were sometimes denied the body entirely. In the Wild West, punishment extended into eternity itself. Tar and feathering. Tar and feathering evolved from medieval Europe into something uniquely terrifying on the American frontier. This punishment wasn't reserved for the worst criminals. It was used against anyone who violated the community's moral code. Political dissidents, corrupt officials, men who failed to pay debts, even newspaper editors who printed unpopular opinions. The process was designed to maximize pain and humiliation. Victims would be captured at night, stripped naked or down to undergarments, and then came the tar. This was pine tar heated to 150 to 200 degrees Fahrenheit. When that scalding liquid hit skin, the agony was indescribable. It adhered instantly, seeping into every pore, burning through outer layers of skin and creating third-degree burns across the body. Victims would scream and thrash, but the process never stopped. Tar was poured over the head, back, chest, and legs until they were covered completely. Before the tar cooled, feathers would be applied, sticking to create a grotesque parody of a bird. But the feathers weren't just humiliation. They trapped heat against the skin, intensifying the burning and preventing natural cooling. Then came the parade. Victims were forced through town, often riding backwards on a rail placed between their legs that would dig into their groin. The crowd threw rotten food, mud, stones, excrement. Children were encouraged to join in. The parade could last hours, with the victim taken to multiple locations for maximum exposure. The real horror came after removing the tar. This took days or weeks and was extraordinarily painful. The tar had cooled and hardened, bonding to skin and hair so completely that removal was nearly impossible without taking flesh with it. Victims tried scraping with knives, which caused infection, soaking in lye, which burned remaining skin, using animal fat to dissolve it, agonizingly slow. Many developed severe infections. Some lost fingers or toes to gangrene. Others were left with permanent scarring across their entire bodies. Even after physical wounds healed, victims found themselves shunned. Businesses refused to serve them, and communities drove them out. Being marked as an outcast was sometimes worse than execution. Branding. Branding started as a way to mark cattle, but frontier communities applied the same method to humans. The message was clear. Criminals were property, animals to be marked and tracked. The branding iron would be heated until it glowed red or white hot, reaching 800 to 1000 degrees Fahrenheit. The condemned would be restrained, tied to a post, or held by multiple men because no one could remain still through what was coming. The anticipation itself was torture, watching the iron heat up, knowing what was about to happen but powerless to stop it. When glowing metal made contact with skin, the flesh sizzled and smoked, the smell of burning meat filling the air. The pain was beyond imagination, a white-hot agony that burned through skin into the soul. Victims would scream until their voices gave out, thrash so violently that bones could break. Some passed out from shock, but the branding had to be perfect. The iron was pressed firmly and held for several seconds, sometimes 10, to ensure the burn went deep enough for a permanent scar. If the brand wasn't clear on the first attempt, the process would be repeated, burning through already traumatized tissue. The symbols were carefully chosen: T for thief, usually on the hand or forehead; M for murderer; R for rogue. The location was equally important. Hands were always visible, impossible to hide when shaking hands. The forehead was reserved for the worst crimes, ensuring no one could look at the person without seeing their mark of shame. The immediate aftermath was excruciating. The burn would become infected almost immediately in an era before antiseptics. Many brands became gangrenous, requiring amputation if the infection spread. The social consequences were total and permanent. A branded person was marked forever. No one would hire a man branded as a thief. No woman would marry him. No business would be conducted with him. Many found themselves pushed into crime because society gave them no other option. Unable to work legitimate jobs, unable to integrate, they had little choice but to continue down the criminal path. The brand, intended as deterrent, became self-fulfilling prophecy. The cruelest variation was branding people later proven innocent. Once applied, there was no taking it back. An innocent man could carry the mark of a criminal for life, his reputation destroyed, all because of a mistake that could never be corrected. The gauntlet. Running the gauntlet combined physical brutality with psychological torture and public humiliation. Two parallel lines of people would form, 20 to 50 in each line, armed with switches, whips, clubs, rocks, or fists. These weren't executioners. They were neighbors, shopkeepers, farmers, women, even children. The space between lines was narrow, 4 to 6 feet. The length could vary from 30 feet to over 100 yards. The criminal would be stripped to the waist, hands tied behind their back to prevent defense. The rules were simple: run from one end to the other while everyone tried to hurt you as badly as they could. When the signal came, the condemned had to run. Those who hesitated would be beaten where they stood. Those who fell would be beaten until they got up. The only way out was through. As the runner moved down the gauntlet, they were struck from both sides simultaneously. Whips cracked across their back, leaving bloody welts. Clubs crashed into ribs, arms, head. Rocks thrown at close range broke bones. Fists pummeled from every angle. The pain was overwhelming, disorienting, all-consuming. But physical pain was only part of the ordeal. The psychological horror was equally devastating. The runner could see what was coming, could watch people ahead preparing their strikes, anticipating pain before it arrived. They could see faces of people they knew, neighbors they had shared meals with, all eager to hurt them. That betrayal, the transformation of community into mob, was its own torture. Some tried to run fast, hoping to minimize time, but running fast meant less ability to dodge or protect vital areas. Others moved slowly, trying to weave and duck, but moving slowly meant more strikes overall. When runners finally emerged, assuming they made it, they were nearly unrecognizable. Their back was a mess of bloody welts and deep lacerations, arms and ribs broken in multiple places, faces swollen and bruised beyond recognition. Blood poured from dozens of wounds, soaking their pants, pooling at their feet. Many collapsed immediately, bodies unable to continue. Medical care was minimal at best. The prevailing attitude was that punishment had been deserved. Many suffered infections and some died from complications. Survivors carried physical scars for life, backs permanently marked, fingers and ribs that never healed properly, hearing loss from head blows. The psychological impact was equally profound. To be beaten by your own community created wounds that never healed. Many developed what we'd recognize today as PTSD, unable to trust anyone, jumping at sudden movements. Even after serving their punishment, survivors found themselves ostracized, literally beaten out of the social fabric with no way back in. Ear cropping and nose slitting. Ear cropping and nose slitting were permanent mutilations designed to mark a criminal's face forever. These punishments had roots in medieval European law and were adapted to frontier justice. The logic was brutal. If branding could mark the body, why not reshape the face itself, creating a mark that could never be hidden, never be covered, never never be forgotten. Most commonly used for crimes of deception or repeat offenses, the reasoning was that if someone proved untrustworthy, their face should announce it to everyone they met. Ear cropping involved removing part or all of one or both ears using a sharp blade, usually a knife or specialized shears. The condemned would be restrained, tied to a post, or held down. There was no anesthetic, no mercy. When the blade cut through cartilage and flesh, the pain was immediate and intense. Ears are filled with nerve endings, and cutting through them triggered pain that radiated through the entire head. The sound was equally horrifying, a crunching, tearing noise. Blood would pour from the wound, streaming down the neck. Some executioners removed just the bottom lobe, leaving most of the structure, but creating obvious deformity. Others removed the entire outer ear, leaving only the ear canal and a ragged stump. The most sadistic removed both ears entirely, creating a disturbing, inhuman appearance. Nose slitting was even more horrific. The nose sits at the center of the face, impossible to hide or cover without appearing suspicious. Destroying it meant destroying a fundamental part of what made someone human. The process typically involved deep cuts along the sides of the nose, sometimes cutting through the nostrils, other times slicing vertically from bridge to tip. In severe cases, the entire nose might be partially or fully removed, leaving a gaping hole that exposed the nasal cavity. The condemned would be held down, head immobilized, while the executioner worked. The pain was excruciating. The nose contains dense networks of nerve endings and blood vessels. Cutting through them created an explosion of agony that many described as their entire face on fire. Bleeding was profuse, difficult to stop, and the condemned would choke on their own blood as it ran down their throat. Some panicked, unable to breathe through their damaged nose, convinced they were drowning. The immediate aftermath was a medical nightmare. In an era before antiseptics or antibiotics, facial wounds were extremely dangerous. Wounds often needed to be cauterized with hot irons to stop bleeding, adding a second layer of agony. Infection was almost inevitable. Many died from infections that followed, developing gangrene that spread across the face. The social consequences were total. In a society where a man's reputation was everything, having a face that marked you as a criminal meant social death. No one would hire a man with cropped ears or a slit nose. No woman would marry him. Many mutilated criminals were driven into wilderness, forced to live apart from society entirely. To look in a mirror and see a monster, to know this was how everyone would see you forever, was psychological torture that never ended. Perhaps most horrific was that these punishments were sometimes applied to people later proven innocent. Once the mutilation was complete, there was no taking it back, no fixing the mistake. An innocent man could carry the mark of a criminal for life, his future ruined because of an error that could never be corrected. Flogging. Flogging was perhaps the most common punishment after hanging, and in some ways even more brutal. While hanging ended a life, flogging destroyed it while forcing the victim to continue living. It was public torture carried out before crowds who came to witness, judge, and often cheer as the whip fell again and again. The punishment could be given for theft, assault, fraud, adultery, public drunkenness, any crime too serious for jail but not serious enough for execution. The number of lashes ranged from a dozen for minor offenses to hundreds for serious ones. The whip was a carefully designed instrument of pain. Most common was the bullwhip, or cat-o' nine tails. A standard whip consisted of braided leather, 8 to 12 feet long, with the tip weighted or knotted to increase impact. The cat-o' nine tails was particularly vicious. 9 separate cords attached to a single handle, each with knots tied along its length or metal woven into the braid. When this struck flesh, the 9 tails would spread, each cutting its own path. A single strike created 9 separate wounds. On the day of flogging, the condemned was brought to the town square. A whipping post would be set up, a sturdy vertical beam with iron rings. The condemned was stripped to the waist, upper body completely bare, arms stretched above their head, wrists tied to iron rings with rough rope that cut into skin. Feet might be tied as well, or they'd be forced to stand on tiptoes, creating additional strain even before whipping began. The crowd would gather, sometimes hundreds. There was a carnival atmosphere, people betting on how many lashes the condemned could take before passing out, vendors selling food and drink, children running around playing. It was entertainment, brutal entertainment. When the whip struck for the first time, the condemned would cry out involuntarily. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, a burning, tearing sensation radiating through the entire body. The whip would wrap around the torso, sometimes striking chest or stomach, doubling the pain. Skin would split open instantly, leaving a deep red welt that quickly started bleeding. But that was just the first strike. The whipping continued, strike after strike, with 5 to 10 seconds between each blow. This spacing was deliberate, giving time to feel full impact, to anticipate the next one, to beg for mercy that never came. As flogging continued, damage escalated dramatically. Initial strikes left welts and cuts. Next strikes landed on already wounded flesh, tearing wounds deeper and wider. Blood began flowing freely, running down the back, pooling at feet. By the 20th or 30th lash, skin hung in strips, revealing white fascia and muscle. By the 50th, the back was virtually unrecognizable, a raw expanse of torn flesh and streaming blood. The whip made a different sound, a wet, meaty impact rather than sharp crack. Blood sprayed with each strike, spattering the executioner and front rows. The condemned's reactions changed as flogging progressed. Initial cries became screams, then hoarse moans, then sometimes silence, as the body went into shock. Some lost consciousness midway through, their body going limp. But the flogging didn't stop. The medical aftermath was catastrophic. Once cut down, the victim was in critical condition. The back was one massive wound, inches deep in places, with dangerous blood loss. Wounds needed cleaning, which meant pouring whiskey or salt water directly onto exposed flesh, creating fresh agony. Infection was almost certain. Fever would set in within days. Some developed sepsis, leading to organ failure and death. Even when wounds healed, scars remained forever. Victims carried thick, raised scar tissue across their entire back, visible every time they removed their shirt. The scar tissue limited range of motion and caused chronic pain for years. The psychological trauma was profound. To be stripped, bound, and whipped like an animal in front of the entire community was humiliation that transcended physical pain. Many victims reported that the memory of the crowd watching was worse than the memory of the whip itself. Vigilante justice. Vigilante justice represents the most chaotic and brutal aspect of frontier punishment. Unlike other punishments with some structure or legal procedure, vigilante justice was raw mob rule dressed in the language of righteousness. It was what happened when communities decided the law was too slow, too lenient, or too inconvenient, and took matters into their own hands. The Wild West was perfect for this. Official law enforcement was sparse, often a single sheriff covering hundreds of square miles. Courts met infrequently, sometimes once or twice a year. In this vacuum, communities developed their own systems of justice that were swift, brutal, and terrifyingly arbitrary. Vigilante groups formed vigilance committees or committees of safety, names suggesting organization and legitimacy. These committees included respected community members, businessmen, ranchers, even clergy. Their presence gave an air of respectability, suggesting civic duty rather than mob violence. The San Francisco Vigilance Committee had over 6,000 members at its peak and essentially took over the city's law enforcement, establishing its own courts, jails, and execution grounds. They hanged multiple men, exiled dozens more, and ruled through fear. They were a private army answerable to no one. Montana's vigilantes hanged dozens throughout the 1,860 seconds. The Bald Knobbers of Missouri, the San Saba mob in Texas. Each committee left a trail of bodies in its wake. When a vigilance committee decided someone was guilty, the process was a mockery of justice. Armed men would show up at night and drag the accused from their home while family watched helplessly. The accused was brought to a hastily assembled trial, held in a saloon, barn, or under a tree. A handful of committee members served as judges and jury. Witnesses might be heard, but only if they supported the predetermined verdict. The accused might speak in their own defense, but their words carried little weight. The decision was usually made before the trial began. These trials lasted anywhere from minutes to hours. The verdict was almost always guilty. The sentence was almost always death by hanging, carried out immediately. There was no appeals process, no chance for reprieve. Within hours of being accused, a person could be dead. Vigilante executions were designed to terrify. The condemned was marched to the nearest sturdy tree. A noose was thrown over a branch, the rope often rough and poorly tied, ensuring slow, strangling death rather than quick neck break. Sometimes the condemned stood on a horse or wagon, the support removed, leaving them to kick and struggle as they slowly suffocated. Other times, the condemned was simply hauled up by force, multiple vigilantes pulling the rope. This was particularly brutal, as it allowed the mob to feel the victim's weight, to participate directly in the killing. The victim would thrash and struggle, face turning purple, eyes bulging, body convulsing. The worst cases involved multiple executions at once. Trees would bear multiple bodies swaying in the wind, each a testament to the committee's power. Perhaps most horrifying was how often vigilante justice was wrong. In the absence of proper investigation, committees relied on rumor, prejudice, and personal grudges. This led to countless innocent people being killed. A man might be hanged for horse theft based on mistaken identity. Another killed because of a personal dispute with a committee member. The criminal accusation just convenient excuse for murder. Racial minorities and immigrants were particularly vulnerable. Even when the accused had committed some crime, punishment was wildly disproportionate. A man might be hanged for stealing food to feed his starving family. A teenager whipped until his back was destroyed for a prank. Beyond hanging, committees got creative with brutality. Tar and feathering, flogging, branding, ear cropping, all employed by vigilante groups, sometimes in combination. A suspected criminal might be flogged, then tarred and feathered, then exiled, all in the same night. Some groups developed signature punishments. In Montana, suspected criminals were forced to dig their own graves before being shot and buried in them. In other areas, victims were beaten nearly to death, then left in the wilderness to die of exposure. In towns where vigilante committees became entrenched, life became a reign of terror. No one could be sure they were safe. A casual comment could be twisted into evidence. A business dispute could result in accusations. Simply being unpopular could draw the committee's attention. This constant fear corroded the social trust communities needed to survive. Ironically, in trying to create order through fear, vigilante committees often created the very chaos they claimed to prevent. The 7 punishments we've explored today represent some of the darkest chapters in American history. They reveal a society struggling to maintain order in chaos, often becoming monstrous in the process. These weren't just punishments. They were expressions of fear, desperation, and human capacity for cruelty when social constraints are removed. What makes them particularly haunting is that they were inflicted by ordinary people who believed they were doing the right thing. The Wild West wasn't lawless because it lacked laws. It was lawless because justice was indistinguishable from revenge, because punishment became entertainment, because torture became community bonding. Understanding these punishments isn't just about satisfying morbid curiosity. It's about recognizing how thin the veneer of civilization truly is, how quickly we can descend into savagery when we believe it's justified. The frontier may be gone, but the lessons about justice, cruelty, and the importance of due process remain profoundly relevant. If you found this deep dive as fascinating as it is disturbing, subscribe to the channel. We explore the darkest corners of history others won't touch. Hit that like button, drop a comment about which historical period we should investigate next, and check out another video right here. The past is full of secrets, and we're just getting started.